I greet you all once again, and this is our third video in the series of research methods. We have looked at previous videos, have looked at research design in qualitative research and then quantitative research. So here we shall look at mixed methods. We haven't talked much about it because basically it's a method, a research approach that combines the two, qualitative and quantitative. So what exactly is MMR or mixed method research? What exactly is it? It's normally referred to as in the approach under pragmatism, something that is pragmatic. You can look up that word, but essentially what a researcher is looking at is their research problem. You may find you have a research problem that cannot be answered with just a qualitative approach, but also the quantitative approach. And we shall see situations where the need for combining the two applications, the two approaches works. So essentially, it is the researcher to make a determination on what works in order to resolve an existing research gap or problem. So it arises from the research problem itself. The researcher is not just focused on the methods, but is focused more on answering the research problem. And the person deduces that this is the best approach to use. So what are the reasons for mixing? Essentially, it has hinted on all the what I've discussed so far hints on what we're going to see on this slide. It's when a researcher sees that just using quantitative or qualitative approach is insufficient in itself. So the researcher deduces that you need to combine both approaches, the quantitative side, the objective side, and then also getting the real life experiences of those who are going through a particular phenomena or where the research problem has been identified. It's also used when it is seen that both the arguments of both quantitative and qualitative approach provide a better picture. If you look at the research articles you presented, the people who were presenting their research designs were giving reasons for why they chose a particular research approach, why they chose a particular research method. For example, when we looked at the action research paper, you remember the groupware application, the researchers said there was a need to understand. There was a need to understand, and therefore they felt using action research, which allowed one to participate and observe, they would better understand the relationships of a context together with an implemented artifact. So they were giving reasons for that. So therefore, also when a researcher is doing their research, is trying to tackle a particular problem or developing their research design, they may find that this particular problem it gives more weight if we use both quantitative and qualitative approach. Then also when there is a belief that there'll be more evidence and better argument when we combine. Basically, that this is the same as the previous reasons. Now, another point I also want to give you is the community of practice argument. There are certain research communities that lean more towards one approach than the other, or one method over others. Take an example, the education field. Action research is the most popular research method that is pushed forward. That is specific to their field. Design science and action design science, those are particular to the fields of IS and ICT. So also there are certain approaches that are considered best for particular fields. So depending on the field that you're trying to report to. Then also the other point is that there are some people who believe using the mixed method approach presents a better world view or real life picture. Yeah. So it kind of tries to find a middle ground between quantitative and qualitative approach. So when exactly would we use mixed methods? This slide gives us several scenarios when a researcher may use mixed methods. The first one is on the type of research questions that the researcher has. Now, normally, a researcher has, from the research problem, normally, and I think for most of you, you'll have one research question, where you have one research question which is then subdivided into sub-questions. Normally, someone has a research question which is then turned into an objective, and then that objective has several specific research objectives. And the researcher goes ahead to tackle each objective in order to respond to the overall objective, which then answers the research question. So that's normally the case, but there are situations where there are two research questions. One is qualitative in nature, the other is quantitative in nature. And in our previous lectures, we have talked about these different types of research questions. You can go back and review those previous lectures. The second would be the manner in which the research questions are developed. So there are situations where somebody probably may start with a questionnaire or a survey, and in that survey there's an emerging trend. And rather than go back and implement and administer another questionnaire, the person says, let me go in with interviews to understand this emerging trend that was not forethought, something that needs to be understood. The third is on the sampling procedures. Now, in the previous pre-recorded research designs on qualitative research and quantitative, we talked about sampling. In qualitative research, the sampling emerges from the research focus. What it is you're focusing on, you've seen it in a particular organization, and then therefore that organization becomes your case study. Take the example of the action research paper that we looked at. Remember, where the groupware application was implemented in a New Zealand organization. One of the first things the researchers said was that in that particular organization, the need for a groupware application was identified. So the top management said they really needed something to help them in their communication and collaboration as top management. So that was the need for the application. So therefore, the researchers used that organization to study the research gap. That is, to understand what is the interplay between a groupware application and the underlying organizational issues. So that is typically sampling in a qualitative approach. Now, in quantitative approach, what is that? Again, refer to the pre-recorded videos. We have different types of research, of sampling. Quantitative looks at a population, a target population. Now, let me give an example of e-learning, and where somebody wants to look at users' experience with a particular e-learning instance, let's say Moodle. And then you say, okay, what is the teaching and learning population in Uganda? So you have teachers, you have primary, secondary, and tertiary institutions, and say how many are they in total? You say these are the number of students that use e-learning, and these are the number of teaching staff, both primary, secondary, and tertiary, that are using e-learning. And then you say, okay, they are predefined formulas that help you calculate your sample size, and you use those to calculate the sample size that will represent the overall target population. So that is typically the type of sampling that we'd find in quantitative research. So if you find yourself with two types of research, then you also find yourself mixing the two methods. The two types of data collection, where you have two types of data collection procedures. For example, one may have a survey and may also have a focus group discussion. So in that case, one uses mixed methods. Same thing goes for data analysis, when somebody has some numerical data and then another is textual or visual data. Numerical is quantitative, textual or visual is qualitative. And the same thing goes on and on. Here in the second last, when you look at statistical versus thematic, it also goes back to still the data types you've selected. If it's numerical, normally it is analyzed using statistical outputs like graphs and percentages and so on and so forth. When you have themes, that is largely qualitative, themes developing out. So that's where somebody uses mixed methods. Then finally, when you have two types of conclusions, objective, that is quantitative, and subjective, that is qualitative. So how would you plan for mixed methods? So this table here on this slide gives us the different scenarios when we would plan for mixed methods. The first is when we have an equal weight. Take an example. If you have two research questions, one is qualitative, one is quantitative, that there's an equal weight there where one must use the two concurrently, the two research methods concurrently. Then there is sequential. So we shall also discuss this a little bit later. Sequential, let's say starting with qualitative, when you start by trying to understand, but as you understand, you see a common thread of themes developing, and to confirm that thread, you may decide to give a survey. Yeah. So that the quantitative follows the qualitative. Then there's sequential quantitative first. Again, this is when we may start with a survey when you want to explain a relationship or describe something, and then an emerging theme keeps coming up, and then someone says, okay, to understand this a bit better, let me go in with a qualitative approach. Take an example. If let's say you are trying to find out the perceptions of users towards a particular instance that has been implemented, it could be a framework or otherwise, and then maybe you notice respondents maybe from a particular context are more negative than positive about that instance, and then you say, let me carry out interviews to understand this better. The survey doesn't help explain better why these particular people from this context are saying maybe negative about it. So that is starting with quantitative first and then going qualitative. Now, these are some mixed method designs. I'm going to stick to sequential and leave the other ones for because for another time for it to go through. I'm doubtful very much that we shall cover everything in time. So let us start with sequential explanatory. Now, when we look at this first box, it says you look at a short. There's a shorthand written there: Quan data and results. Data and results. So Quan basically stands for quantitative. So this is where the researcher first starts with a quantitative approach. They retrieve some data and results, and from that data they feel that they should follow this up with a qualitative approach, or some qualitative tools to try and understand something better. So based on the two results, they come up with a more concrete interpretation, which they then present to the research world. So this is sequential explanatory. Remember, explanatory is more on the quantitative side. So the sequential explanatory design basically is a two-phase project. So the researcher starts by collecting quantitative data. So typically the emphasis is more on the quantitative data. That is the biggest part of the research. It's more on the quantitative data. But then from emerging themes, they decide to pick a few individuals who may have answered positively or something about a particular phenomenon and follow it up with some interviews just to concretize their answers, their interpretation. So when would you want to use the explanatory approach? The sequential explanatory design. When would one think to use this kind of scenario or this kind of design? Again, going back to what we had said before, it's all stems from the results one gets from the quantitative research when they want to have an in-depth understanding of the quantitative results that have been retrieved. So therefore, the researcher says, let me have a deeper understanding or to affirm my quantitative data with some extra information to explain further with the qualitative data. So here we have a sample of text a researcher may use to explain your sequential explanatory design. Now, why am I placing this here? And you can take time to read even the slides that are accompanying this video. If for some of you, especially the articles which were very precise, they had a small section which talked about research design, and in that they took time to explain their research design, why they took a particular approach, why they selected a particular research method, and how they implemented that research method. That is typically the sample script, the script that one uses. So you can go through it and get an idea of what a researcher would write. The second is exploratory. So exploratory, it essentially begins with the qualitative approach. The researcher collects data and analyzes some results, and from there they may want to confirm their findings by using a quantitative research approach. Already I actually gave you an example of my research where I used focus group discussions, workshops, and interviews. And when I recognized some emerging themes, I wanted to confirm their existence with a survey. So based on that, you create again a stronger argument for your interpretation. So again, the exploratory design is also two-phase, where you start with the qualitative data collection procedures, which are the backbone of your research, and then proceed those with a quantitative data collection approach. So again, typically the emphasis is on the qualitative data, so the quantitative data is simply brought in to emphasize. So I'll give you an example for me when I was presenting my data in my 6th chapter. That's why I presented my findings. So I would start with my qualitative side and show the themes that were emerging, the variables identified and the themes that were emerging, and then I would confirm that with the survey data, which would confirm that majority felt this was the issue, and to a lesser extent these ones. So that was simply to confirm what it was that I was trying to, the results that I was interpreting. So when do we use them? When would we use this approach? We first start by explore. First of all, we start by exploring because that's the area that is unknown. Then we develop a classification or a typology for testing. So just as the example I gave you for my research. As the themes were developing, I wanted to test them further to find out if this was truly the feeling of most of the users in this particular context where I was researching. So again, here is a sample script of how one would indicate their research design using this mixed research method approach. So I thank you for listening. I decided to keep not to complicate it further with the concurrent design approaches, but I just to be at least to guide you if anyone wishes to use the mixed method approach in your dissertation. So let's continue this conversation on Moodle. I'm putting up a discussion forum for all the videos, and for any issues that we need to discuss, we can use the forum and our online class. So thank you for listening.